Donald Trump, whether he likes it or not, his term is coming to an end and is going to go to jail unless...
At first, it sounded like another rally moment. Loud, emotional, built for headlines. But something about the tone felt different. This was not just political criticism. It was a moral judgment delivered publicly, confidently, and without hesitation. An African opposition leader, Julius Malema, stood before his supporters and spoke about Donald Trump, not as a distant foreign president, but as someone accountable in the court of global history. He declared that Trump's time was ending and that consequences were inevitable. Whether one agrees with his words or not, the posture itself was striking. For generations, African leaders were the ones judged by Western media, by international institutions, by ratings agencies, and by foreign think tanks. The direction of scrutiny usually flowed from north to south. But in this speech, the direction is reversed. An African politician positioned himself as the one evaluating a Western president. That shift is not small. It is psychological. Malema did not argue policy details. He did not analyze trade agreements or military alliances. Instead, he delivered what sounded like a verdict. He accused Trump of destabilizing global order and undermining international law. The focus was less about specific actions and more about legitimacy: who gets to define it, who gets to violate it, and who gets to judge it. This is where the speech becomes larger than one individual. For many in Africa and across the global south, there is a long-standing perception of asymmetry in global accountability. Smaller nations face swift consequences for breaking international norms. Powerful nations often negotiate their consequences. Whether that perception is fully accurate or not, it shapes political consciousness. By invoking international law, Malema made a calculated move. Rather than rejecting global rules, he framed himself as defending them. He suggested that the powerful abandon the very systems they claim to protect. That inversion is strategic. It recasts Africa not as destabilizing, but as demanding consistency. The language of inevitability, "his day is coming," was not legal analysis. It was historical framing. In African political memory, history bends slowly but decisively. Colonial empires fell. Apartheid ended. Dictatorships collapsed. Malema was borrowing that historical arc. He was suggesting that power cycles and dominance expires. But this was not just geopolitics. It was also domestic strategy. Opposition leaders often build credibility by challenging powerful symbols. Trump, in this context, became more than an American figure. He represented Western unilateralism, racial hierarchy debates, and a period of blunt transactional diplomacy. By attacking him confidently, Malema signaled strength to his base. The message was clear: Africa does not need permission to speak. However, flipping the hierarchy requires justification. After the moral indictment came a deeper accusation that governance based on emotion rather than law weakens global stability. For smaller or historically exploited nations, international law is not abstract theory. It is leverage. It is protection against raw power. African states have experienced periods where sovereignty meant little in the face of foreign intervention. So when powerful leaders appeared dismissive of multilateral agreements, climate accords, or trade norms, it reinforces old suspicions. Rules are binding for the weak and flexible for the strong. Malema seized that suspicion and flipped it into positioning. He portrayed Africa as the defender of structured order. This reframing challenges the long-standing Western narrative that casts Africa as unstable or institutionally fragile. Instead, he suggested that instability sometimes originates elsewhere. Then came the most controversial layer: race. Malema suggested that Trump's global respect is influenced by racial hierarchy. On the surface, it sounds provocative. Beneath it lies a deeper historical memory. For centuries, global authority wore a European face. Colonial administrators assumed command without invitation. Even after formal colonialism ended, much of the global architecture, financial institutions, security alliances, media dominance remained Western. Malema was not simply criticizing policy. He was challenging inherited legitimacy. In South Africa, This terrain is especially sensitive. Apartheid is recent history. Economic inequality still maps along racial lines. Land ownership still reflects colonial structures. When Malema raised race, he tapped into that lived memory. But he also understood the danger. Framing everything racially risks collapsing a political argument into resentment. So he pivoted carefully. He clarified that the struggle is not against white people but against white supremacy, a system, not a skin tone. That distinction matters. By targeting ideology rather than individuals, he insulated his movement from accusations of racial hatred. He reinforced this by referencing Marx and Lenin, white thinkers whose philosophies shaped anti-imperial and anti-capitalist movements. The logic is deliberate. If your ideological framework includes white philosophers, your struggle cannot be reduced to racial animosity. This repositioning transforms the debate. It shifts from identity to structure, from individuals to systems of domination. That allows the argument to scale beyond South Africa. It connects to global economic inequality, colonial extraction, sanctions regimes, and financial hierarchies. Still, rhetoric alone does not sustain movements. Malema seemed aware that in the era of social media, clips can be weaponized. Context evaporates. Opponents isolate phrases. Narratives form within minutes. So he decentralized the explanation. He instructed supporters to go door to door and explain the ideology. That move reveals strategy. Movements survive through repetition at the grassroots level, not viral moments. Historically, liberation movements and trade unions relied on direct community engagement to bypass hostile media environments. Malema was building narrative resilience, preparing his base to defend and contextualize his rhetoric. He anticipated backlash. Instead of softening his tone, he strengthened the organizational structure. Then came a stabilizing sentence. Any white person who loves South Africa is a brother. That line reassures moderates. It calms economic actors. It signals that this is not a call for racial expulsion, but ideological alignment. In a country built on a fragile democratic transition, that reassurance is essential. Finally, the speech closed not in fury but in discipline. Malema thanked supporters for their discipline, not their anger. That word changes the entire interpretation. Discipline implies structure, hierarchy, planning, and long-term vision. It signals that the speech was strategic, not impulsive. For decades, African political actors were portrayed as reactive to Western pressure. In this speech, Malema was not reacting defensively. He was defining, judging, instructing, and organizing. Whether one agrees with him or not, the posture is assertive. This reflects a broader generational shift in segments of African politics. Younger movements increasingly feel less obligated to cushion criticism of Western power. The psychological barrier has thinned. Global economic and military dominance has not disappeared, but psychological dominance is eroding. Psychological shifts often precede structural ones. Malema's speech was not merely an insult directed at a foreign leader. It was a performance of repositioning. It asked deeper questions. Who defines global morality? Who enforces international law? Who gets judged and who does the judging? By ending calmly, emphasizing discipline and organization, he presented his movement as a structured challenger to inherited hierarchies, not chaotic disruptors, but strategic competitors in the narrative of legitimacy. The significance of the speech lies less in its provocation and more in its confidence. It reflects a segment of African political thought that no longer sees itself as peripheral. It sees itself as authorized to speak upward, and to do so without apology. The combination of bold rhetoric and controlled closure was not accidental. It was strategic, and perhaps that is the real shift. Not that global power has equalized, but that the assumption of silence has disappeared. The question now is not whether such speeches spark outrage. They will. The deeper question is whether this posture represents a temporary rhetorical surge or the beginning of a sustained psychological transformation in how parts of Africa engage the global order. Because once a generation grows comfortable judging power instead of merely responding to it, the narrative balance begins to change. And narratives, over time, reshape systems.